For startups hiring engineers and engineers looking to join them, this podcast is for you.
Hi, welcome to Your Next Tech Startup. I'm host Isabel Rasmussen. Today we are doing a different kind of episode in that Daniel is going to be asking the questions. I don't have a really good idea of what software engineers want to know from recruiters, but Daniel does. So he is going to ask me the questions, and hopefully this episode allows people to kind of understand more about the recruiting process, why things work the way they do in regards to startups and hiring. And as I always like to share, I am a startup tech recruiter. I have a decade of experience doing that. I have no idea how hiring happens in big tech. So all of my answers will be related to a decade of experience, primarily as a Bay Area startup recruiter. So that could be relevant or not relevant to some people. And another thing to share is I hate being interviewed. So I think the reason why I bring a lot of empathy into how I interview other people is because I hate being interviewed. My ADHD works in a way that it makes it really hard for me to answer questions in a whatever interview type environment in a way that is short and to the point. Let's hope I don't ramble too much. Daniel, before we get started with questions for me, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Dan. I appreciate you having me here. Currently, I'm a software engineer at Netflix. I've been in the field for 20-ish years. You mentioned your focus being startups. I actually worked in startups for quite a while myself. So my current job is the first one that I've had in big tech. So like I said, I've got a decent amount of experience, both as an IC in startups as well as a hiring manager. A lot of the last 10 years, thinking about interviewing, thinking about hiring. I've been a manager. So it's a topic that I'm very interested in talking about, as I think there are a lot of changes happening, lately in this area. So looking forward to chatting, and hopefully this doesn't feel like an interview.
And your kind of passion around interviewing has taken like a new space this last year because you also have a newsletter.
I do. I have a newsletter. It's called Career Fitness. I started posting on LinkedIn in January just as an experiment. And out of that came the newsletter, where it's easier to just kind of write longer form posts. So there I talk about everything ranging from interviewing to hiring to career fitness to just, how to stay on top of things in a very fast moving software engineering industry.
Yeah, so people might want to check that out. Okay, we will get started with the questions.
Great. So we'll start off easy. You've been in
and
recruitment,
I can just
and
feel my anxiety increasing.
Well, the first one is just talking about what you enjoy, right? So hopefully not too stressful. But you've been in recruitment, you've been a talent partner for a while. I'm curious just to hear what excites you about the role that you have, and maybe something that engineers like myself or other people in different roles might not think about when they think about recruitment or talent partners.
So I think it's never boring. And if it is boring, you're about to get laid off. So, I mean, that's a mixed bag. But I like a bit of drama and like lots of highs and lows that happen really fast. And so in recruiting, it's just this constant, like, there's just a bunch of stuff going on. There's things that are happening that are really great, and there's things that are happening that aren't great. And because it's all happening all the time, like I can be really excited about something that falls apart, and then I can be upset about it, but I experience my emotions pretty quick and intense. And I think recruiting is quick and intense. It works for me.
Okay. Do you think part of the role is kind of helping candidates navigate that kind of up and down too as they're going through the job search?
As a recruiter, you represent the company 98% of the time. So you can help candidates with that a little bit, but honestly, I think a therapist or a career coach is probably the better person to be doing that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And I do career coaching every once in a while, and I do that when I'm a career coach.
Gotcha. Fair enough. How do you think AI plays into, it being a candidate-driven market versus, I guess, a company or an employer-driven market, right? Like, how do you think AI is factoring into that?
So it's more opinions that I've heard from other people that AI is delaying the need to rehire because employers are still sorting out how much AI can do, and that is delaying the fact that they need to hire?
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with that. And it's been a couple of years since I was in the smaller side of the startup world, so I'm not as familiar with it there. But I do think there is, potentially a growing trend for some of the more entry level roles to at least be evaluated in that, well, do we actually need a human to do this, right? Or can we
Uh,
have some form of
yeah.
AI do it?
And so that's tricky. So I've never hired for entry level.
Mm,
So it's really hard for me to speak to that. Like typically I'm coming in when startups are wanting to like up level their team and it just,
gotcha.
I don't know, for whatever reason, that's just been my world. So I am aware that there is a feeling that what a junior engineer provides at a company, I think this is regardless of size, can kind of be provided by working with AI now. And I, I don't know how accurate that is. I am aware that there are a lot of companies that previously did hire early career people and they're not hiring them. I do think this is more of a big tech issue than it is a startup issue in general. I think it's best for startups when they're hiring for, at least the first, whatever, 5 engineers on a team that they've made mistakes at other companies and learned from those mistakes before they join a startup and are building from 0 to 1.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I was employee number one at a startup years ago and, was tasked with building out the engineering team. And I think it's tricky when you're doing something brand new as a startup and you're hiring folks that are brand new to the industry, right? I don't know that that's the best combo. So definitely agree with you there. All right, so let's get into hiring a little bit and kind of some of the more specifics here. So we'll kind of go through the various phases of the hiring life cycle, if you will. And you mentioned that you're in startups. You mentioned you're kind of focusing more on senior roles. So I guess with that context, let's look at sourcing. And a lot of the topics and a lot of the questions that I get on LinkedIn is around ATS systems, right? And I think engineers, for better or worse, kind of look at those as almost the enemy, right? And I think, and again, this is more of a big tech thing, but like I think companies are looking at those to scale just out of necessity. But I'm curious your perspective from the startup side. Like, is that something that you see, and kind of what's your opinion on these types of systems?
Yeah. So I have tried recruiting without an ATS system, and that is an absolute fucking disaster. So all the engineers who might be like, oh, these ATS systems, like they're whatever. I don't even know what the complaint is, but like if you think ghosting and like not following up and all of those things are bad, a world without ATS systems would be 10 times worse. Now, this is, I think, a big tech problem is these archaic ATS systems. So I had a role where I was building a startup within a big company. It's the only time I've ever been associated with a big company. And their ATS system was very old. Like, I won't name whatever, but old. I was in tears. Like, I could not figure out how to do anything. It was so complicated. And so I don't know why any company uses those like really old ATS systems. I think that is, like I said, like a big company problem, not a startup problem. And they're horrible. And I think they make hiring miserable, but that's not a startup problem.
Yeah, I think it's similar to if you go into like a financial company, you're like, oh, you're still using Windows 95. Cool. Why are you doing that? Right? Like it's not unlike that scenario. But I think like from an engineering perspective, I think a lot of the impression of ATS is that they're kind of blocking people from getting into the interview process, right? Like the ATS is rejecting them. I don't know that that's true or not, but I think that's the perception that I hear a lot.
There is
And people
always
would,
a human pushing a button to make that happen. Yeah. The ATS system is not doing it on its own. Well, if it is doing it on its own, it is because a human, either by error or by intention, has set the system to reject in certain ways. It's something that I've not done much of. I've played around with the like AI beta features in these ATS systems and they're inaccurate. So for a senior software engineering role, I don't want to look at people who graduated, whether it's a master's or whatever. If you graduated in 2025, in my opinion, you are not a senior software engineer. And so I would love it if an ATS system could auto reject everybody who had graduated in 2024 and 2025, probably 2023. But when I tried to put those filters on it and then I look to check, I don't know if everybody's looking to check the filter, but it's inaccurate. So
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, right? It's like a lot of people right now are just applying for a ton of roles, mostly ones that they're not qualified for in some way or another. Then
they've
obviously
been
they
doing
get
that forever.
rejected. Fair, but then they get rejected, then they blame it on the technology versus maybe applying to 1,000 roles with one click isn't actually the answer, right? But it's curious to hear it from your perspective. Just out of curiosity, like how many applicants do you get for a typical senior software engineer role at the startups that you're working for?
Yeah, so it's on-site and remote are two very different ball games right now. So I will say that on-site hiring in San Francisco is pretty similar to what it was like in 2019. So that it's almost all of your applicants are not senior, and it's pretty rare to get a good applicant for those on-site roles. For remote roles, you have incredible applicants, like to the degree that I don't really understand why there's a huge need for sourcing for remote roles. I know that it's happening, but to me, I'm like, if you know how to work your process in the right way, you can just make great hires typically off of your applicants for a remote role. Did I fully answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just trying to get a sense of like the scale for smaller companies, right? Because like I know if big tech posts
Okay,
a
so like
role,
number
it's
of
in the
applicants.
tens of thousands of applications, right? I'm curious, like
Yeah.
if you're, a 50-person startup, is it still that same scale, or is it, maybe hundreds or maybe, 50?
Okay. Yeah. So you can get it's hard because like I do easy apply on LinkedIn. I think I had the job open for maybe 10 days or so. I think it was a remote role. It was a lead software engineer and there was 700 applicants, but okay, so I have lied. I tell LinkedIn to auto reject out of country applicants, which I assume that LinkedIn does correctly. Out of country, I feel like is a pretty easy filter. And it's been a filter that LinkedIn has offered for forever. So I assume it is accurately done. But so of the resumes that I actually was looking over was maybe 500. And I have my sourcer look through all of those resumes first, get rid of the ones that are, the new grads and just like highly not a fit. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so we got a couple hundred resumes. There's a sourcer that's looking at them. Another kind of potential source of debate on LinkedIn is like, how much time does somebody really spend looking at a resume? And so from your perspective, is it 10 seconds? Is it a minute? Like, is there even an answer to it, right? Or is it just, it
10 seconds.
depends? 10 seconds. Okay.
So my goal is 10 seconds to decide if I should spend more than 10 seconds. So there's obviously resumes that I'm spending a minute on, but I'm never spending 5 minutes on a resume. It's impossible. So
Okay, so we've got 10 seconds. As a lead engineering candidate, right? What can I put on my resume, or how can I best format or kind of display my story on a resume so that it stands out in 10 seconds, right? Like what are some examples of maybe things that are like work really well and things that don't work so much?
So what to me works the best is you have worked at startups that just by name, I know that it's a startup, or you say very clearly, because I mean, that's the tricky thing with startups. Like we all know the things, but there are so many startups, like, I can't know the name of every single startup. And so if you say I was the fifth engineer at a Series A startup as the first bullet on the bullets for that role, then I'm like, startup person. Like that's what I want. So I think for a lead software engineer at a startup, the best thing that you can do is previously had the title lead software engineer. or senior software engineer, but then you're talking about like leading a team. And then it's very clear in those 10 seconds that you have worked at startups. If I have to, and I will do it, but if I have to click on the company, which you can't do on a resume, but if it's LinkedIn, I can click on the company and then I can see if it's a startup or not. But in general, startups like to hire startup people. And so I'm filtering for startup people.
Yeah.
And then there's also the how to write a resume that will ensure that I reject you. So this might actually be more helpful because what I had just given the example to was specific to one role. So if you list 100 technologies, especially like I hate the box format. They put all these like boxes and like da 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 and not like .NET and da 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 like languages like from like 20 years ago, like, and there's 100 of them. There's a very good chance I'm going to reject you. If at the top of your resume in 20 font, you tell me that you are a Java engineer, and then every role I am a Java engineer. I have not hired for a Java engineer position for close to a decade. So if I am hiring a lot of times it's a polyglot, but like if the reality is they're using like Python on the back end and your resume is just like spewing the word Java all over it, this is a huge problem. Like I would say a fifth of resumes I see are these Java resumes. Like, I'm so sick of it. I'm rejecting you because what you're telling me is you are a Java engineer. I am hiring someone who's going to have to work on Python, and you're telling me that you are not that person. Other things is just like that, like super tech focused, just like every bullet is like, I use this technology to do this with this other technology. The reality is tech recruiters are not software engineers. So we don't really understand what that means. It is helpful for like the whole, I do need to find, okay, yes, they've worked with like AWS or GCP. Like I do need to find, so you do have to have your technologies in there, but not like every single bullet is just like this technology and this technology and blah, blah, blah. Like I want to understand business impact. I want to understand that you've worked with other people. So if you have that just like really like tech blobby wordiness, and if you then also they do that in the interviews, I'm not interviewing you. And then that last one, that a insane amount of resumes, like I would say 80% of software engineering resumes do not mention the fact that they work with humans. Like there's nothing about mentoring. There's nothing about collaborating with product. Just like it's all of the bullets are so focused on like this thing that they accomplished with using this technology tool. And if the hiring manager says, I want someone who is collaborative. I want someone who, is going to be a great mentor, which a lead engineer should be. And you say nothing about working with humans, it doesn't look like you're qualified for the job.
Yeah, I think those are great points. Especially in the world of AI, where more and more of the code the engineers write is done kind of with a quote unquote co-pilot, let's say, right? I think the role and the value that engineers add it's not moving away from the code, but it's definitely there's more of a focus on solving problems with the code or AI just like as a tool, right?
Yeah, I think there's also possibly this AI shift. I don't know if it's the AI, but I have also noticed this shift around an engineer's ability to understand the business space.
Yep.
And so,
which should have always been the case, right?
But it wasn't.
But perhaps it wasn't as much as it is now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean those are all great things to think about when writing a resume. I'm curious, like when you think about just like the concept of a resume, right? Does it now extend beyond just that quote unquote piece of paper to social media, to other, whether it's YouTube or LinkedIn or kind of other presences that a person might have? Or do you still only look at, the actual document and then maybe LinkedIn quickly?
So I do a lot of easy applies on LinkedIn. And the way that actually works is I see your LinkedIn profile easily. Like I click on you and I'm really just clicking on your LinkedIn profile when you do an easy apply or when you apply through LinkedIn. And I have to go in and click a button and sometimes download your resume, which I don't like to do. 9 times out of 10, I'm only looking at your LinkedIn. I'm not looking at your resume. That is so one of my biggest pet peeves is if you are applying to jobs on LinkedIn, your LinkedIn profile should read like a resume. You should have bullet points under each job that you have, because I'm clicking on that and you're using that to apply for jobs, and then you're telling me nothing about yourself. Same with the open to work people. Oh my God. Like the number of people who mark themselves as open to work and their LinkedIn profiles say absolutely nothing besides where they've worked is ridiculous. And like the reality is, like a software engineer, senior software engineer title, like that tells me like 20% of what I actually need to know about you. Like what languages are you working with? Like, what like kind of business problems are you solving? Like all the things that are needed in a resume, your LinkedIn profile should have that. I don't go beyond that. I don't look at if you're active on LinkedIn. I should get in the habit more of looking to see if you have recommendations. That's like on my personal how to become a better recruiter, is just like scrolling down and being like, does this person have recommendations? But other than that, that's what I focus on.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was going to ask what you thought about recommendations, because I think for a while there was like a section on LinkedIn for like skills, and somebody could like, acknowledge that you're good at JavaScript or jQuery or whatever the skill was, right? I think that's kind of faded away. Like I've got some from 15 years ago and I don't think anybody cares. But recommendations, I think, are still useful as long as they're real, which is, I guess, a whole nother topic. But all right, so let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about referrals. In your experience, like how often are referrals successful? Does it matter if it's kind of like a quote unquote warm versus cold referral? Warm being like you actually have worked with the person, cold being like somebody sent me a message and say, hey, please refer me, and I just did it. What's your take on that side of things?
So I hate cold referrals. I think of it as like if you tell me to eat somewhere and you have never eaten there, I am not going to go and eat there. I think warm referrals are very important. Like oftentimes there'll be like a warm referral, and I think of like a recruiter's job for interviewing is really is this person worth the time of the hiring manager? Is really kind of what I'm filtering for. I sometimes with warm referrals, I'll be like, do I even really need to talk to them? Because that filter doesn't need to be put on them. I'll sometimes talk to them and I don't actually even interview them. I just say, hey, this is, the parts about the role. Are there any questions that you have about that I can help you with before you connect with the hiring manager?
Yeah, so a lot of the companies I've worked with, do have incentive programs for referrals, right? I think in which case everybody just tries to do it because oh, well, maybe I'll get $1,000, right, or whatever, right? I think Netflix is interesting that they don't have a referral program. So typically referrals are only done if you actually believe that person will be successful.
Yeah, that's how it should be done.
I agree, but I also think that there's this mindset out there where it's like, well, it's quote unquote, it's so hard to find a job. What do you have to lose by referring me? Like, please just try, right? And I think I struggle with that a bit, right? Because it's like, if there's no incentive, I'm also putting my name on the line to say that I believe you can do it. And if I do that 20 times and nobody works out, at some point they can be like, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So agree. I don't put a lot of weight in cold referrals. I think there are better ways.
And I don't think people should expect cold referrals. Like, I don't know where that comes from, but yeah, when I say work your network, it's connect with the people who know you, know that you're great at what you do, and like those are referrals that are meaningful. Don't reach out to me because I'm a tech recruiter and think that like something magical is going to happen when I don't know you.
Okay, so let's maybe talk about interviewing a little bit. And I think one of the interesting things that I've seen, designing interviews, giving a lot of interviews, is that no two companies will ever trust any other company's interviews, right? So it's like, even if you have somebody who's been in the field for 10 years, they've interviewed successfully and worked at multiple companies. If they come into my company, I'm still going to start over. I'm still going to do the, okay, like, can you write the basic code? Can you do the leak code puzzle? Whatever the process is, right? And it's really interesting that literally nobody trusts anybody else. And we all have to start from scratch. So I'm
Yeah.
curious kind of what your opinion here is, and like, is there any solution to this, or is it's just how it is?
I would love there to be a solution. I don't understand where this lack of trust has come from, but there is so little trust in the hiring process. And I think it is what makes it miserable for everybody. It makes it miserable for hiring managers to feel that they're going to be tricked or cheated. It's miserable for candidates to be treated like someone who's potentially trying to work the system, even though they have like an incredible resume. Like yeah, it sucks. I don't think it's ever going to get any better, but I hope it does.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, one of the hardest things for engineers to agree on is what coding challenge to use during an interview.
Yeah.
So, like, even within one team, just trying to agree on that is really difficult.
Yeah.
And I think there's also this mindset of like, oh, well, I had to solve this really hard problem. Everybody else should have to solve it too, right? And so one of the things that like I've tried to push on is that, within tech hiring, we spend way too much time talking about code, right? Like most loops are like, 70, 80% technical challenges, right? And you get, a decent amount of people that all do equally well. And then you've got this very small amount of time to figure out what actually differentiates people beyond just, cool, you got all the tests to pass. You like did the system design thing. Uh,
Well, and another part of it that is like, so yeah, that 80% of the hoops that you're going to do are technical. The number of hiring managers, engineering leaders that I've talked to over my career is when you really talk about bad hires, I rarely ever hear someone talk about, I hired this person and my God, they couldn't do shit, like in regards to writing code. But what you do hear is that, like, you hired this person, they're a jerk, they're a nightmare to work with, they won't listen to anybody, all of those kind of things. Yet, like, very little time is spent on like getting a feel for culture. Now, I do think some technical interviews are really well designed to get a read on culture as well, but candidates don't fully understand that.
yeah, definitely. Okay, so here's another hot topic. Why is it in our industry that when we apply to jobs and we get rejected, we don't actually know why? Why can't we get even just like a rough answer of, oh, well, you're actually number 75 in a stack of 50 and we already found somebody, or you said Java 10 times and we're not looking for Java, right? Like, why can't we actually share that reason with the person? I'm like, I've got my own answers, but like, I'm curious to hear how you think about it.
Okay, so I think I'll answer it more on what would have to exist
Okay.
for it to be possible to share rejection reasons at scale. So you would have to have training about the laws around sharing that information. One of the things that gets tricky is doing something for someone and not doing it for someone else. And that can be a little in the lawsuity space. So that's something that has had me very hesitant about sharing feedback. If I'm going to share feedback, I'll do it more so on the phone so that there's no legal tracking of my feedback sharing. And I know that like somehow early in my career, there was something about just that whole doing it for some people, not all people, and then what can you share? It's just, I think that fear of lawsuit plays a part into why rejections are so generic. So there would have to be that dreaded ATS system, an ATS system that was designed, which I have never seen, which AI could probably do a really great job of right now, of taking rejection emails and personalizing them. And so so while I'm rejecting a resume, if there was like if I could put in like 10 reasons why I'm rejecting. And then, and then the reality is some people are still not going to get it because you're going to be like some reason that like is more complicated than that. But like 90% get rejected for those reasons, then that would be great. Then I could click on that and then send the rejection note. And then they would get the rejection note that was, you have 2 years experience. This role requires a minimum of 5 years experience. That is why we're not scheduling a phone call. Nicer than that. And then for like technical, because I think people really want them from the technical interviews, the rejection reasons. But with the technical interviews, the person filling out the feedback there would have to be in the feedback form. And again, this is like a specialized ATS system that would have to be created to do this, that there would be this section that says, what feedback do you want to provide to the candidate? And then in theory, they could just like copy some of what they had written on the reason for their feedback and then paste that into the section. There would have to be a significant amount of training, and you'd probably have to have the AI model filter things because, I don't know, startups are full of people who don't follow rules and like understand the law and things like that. So someone could write like something directly to the candidate. I think those are all the things that would have to be in place to make feedback possible. So I think we're very, very far away from that ever happening.
Yeah, I think most people, including myself, don't often think about the legal ramifications of it, right? And I think I likely set myself up for many lawsuits years ago when I used to just give like full direct feedback to everybody that came through the door. And I've since, stopped doing that. But
So why
it's
did
an
you stop
interesting.
doing it?
Well, I worked at a startup where there really were no rules around that sort of thing. And I just felt like, again, as a candidate, I think the reason that people ask about this is because they want to learn and grow from each interview that they failed to then try to do better on the next one, right? But if you don't get any feedback, how do you know what you did wrong? And so I always tried to give people as much as I could around like, here's exactly how that went, right? But not really considering the legal risks in doing so. Then, obviously when you work for bigger companies, you just can't do that, right? And I don't think a lot of candidates really think about those aspects of it that much. Another kind of related and fun thing that I've seen happen sometimes is like as an interviewer, you get to the end of the interviewer, and the last question that the candidate asks you is, can you give me feedback on how I just did? And as an interviewer, I've never quite known how to answer that. I've kind of bounced back and forth between just giving feedback and saying, no, like we need to collect a little feedback from everybody first, and then we'll share it with you. So I've never quite had a good solution to that, but it's an interesting question that some people try to ask, during interviews.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's the sandwich of like good, bad, good. I think it's an okay thing to answer at the end of an interview, but maybe you just highlight, one thing they did good if you're really not going to move them forward, three things they did good if you are going to move them forward. And this is a tricky one. Don't give false hope. Like, so even if you say like,
Well, that's the thing, because typically you don't actually know what the outcome is going to be. Even if you thought it went really well, the other person interviewed them could have said the exact opposite, right? So you really have no idea unless you're really the only person interviewing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, but you could say in this interview,
Yeah.
I don't know what the overall like feedback is going to be or what the outcome of all this is going to be. But in this interview, and it could even be something like lighter, like I like that you asked questions before starting to write your code. I like that you did this before, like you did that. So almost like you're giving them feedback on how they're being a good candidate than if they are a good engineer. So, I mean, you could like your thoughts on whatever cloud, blah, 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 blah was like, I mean, that would be an interesting things that I've never even heard, like, and things that I've never heard could be good or bad. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've started to lean more towards I just don't answer that question. I try to just defer it in as nice of a way as possible, because as soon as I start answering it, I feel like I'm heading down a slippery slope. And so I generally just try to avoid it and ask them if they have any other questions on other topics, right? Because I think that's the time for candidates to really find out more about the company, find out more about the team. I think that's often a better use of me sitting there pondering how to share feedback that I'm not quite even, maybe haven't even formed yet.
Yeah. But this is also something that is a really important point to pull out. If you want feedback, it is 99% of the time, it is not going to happen from a real interview. It is going to happen from mock interviews. So you do mock interviews, right?
I do.
And that's where you can get honest, real feedback. So if that is something that someone wants, don't expect it for free when you're interviewing. You're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely value in mock interviews / career coaching. I think there are times when that investment makes sense, which is, I guess, a whole another topic. So we've got a couple of minutes. Let me maybe ask you one more question here, and then we can wrap this up. I mean, this is something we could probably talk about for hours or days. But, if you had one piece of advice to share with engineers who are out there, looking for jobs in the current market, or maybe let's say in the current startup market, what's the biggest piece of advice that you would give to people right now?
Try to work your network to see if you have any connections to that startup, and focus your energy on the roles that are ones that you could get a warm referral to. If you find a role that you can't get a warm referral to, then spend the time making sure that in 10 seconds, I can tell that you are qualified for the role. So if it is 5 different technologies that are mentioned in that role, make sure that those technologies are on your resume. The number of people that I interview that are like, oh, I forgot to put that on the resume. And I'm just like, well, that's, like in this market, like that's just an easy win. Like use the LLMs to customize your resume to the job before you apply to it. Make it very easy. I'll go through with friends, and if I only have 10 seconds, like, do you have all these other words on it that are filtering out my ability to see what I actually need to see? I have a friend who he worked at Salesforce for a really long time. He wanted me to help him with his resume. And in that conversation of talking about the resume, I looked at the job description. I was like, oh, probably the fact that you worked at Salesforce is attractive to them. And he's like, yes, that's like why, and it is through a warm referral. But he still wants to fix the resume. So I just took his resume. Instead of experience, I wrote relevant experience. And then I got rid of all of the jobs that he had on the first page that weren't relevant experience, so that the Salesforce job could show up on page 1, because that's 10 seconds. And then all of the other work I put on, I called it additional experience, on page 2, and put that there. So his resume isn't in chronological order, but it does highlight the 3 roles that were the most relevant to the role he was applying to.
Got it. Great. All right. Well, this has been really interesting. I hope that engineers that listen to this will gain a little bit of clarity around things like ATS systems and like why we don't get feedback, and perhaps even how to stand out and tell your story as a software engineer. So
Yes.
yeah.
And hopefully with this episode, it answers people's questions. My intention with the podcast is to, there's 2 parts of it. One is to help engineers understand how to be more successful at interviewing. This episode is one way of doing that. I interview people who've just landed roles, and they talk about what they had to do as a candidate to be more successful. I talk to hiring managers about what they're looking for in candidates, and being able to understand that will allow you to be more successful in interviewing. I think there's also this other side of hiring that, at least in the startup world, that there's such little training on how to be better at interviewing, how to be a better hiring manager, learning from other people's mistakes. Like 2 directors of engineering, if they're going out for coffee, they are not talking about how to be better hiring managers. They are talking about like technical problems and things like that. One of my goals with this podcast is, while you're driving to work, you can listen to this and hear other hiring managers talk about what they've learned, how they've become better hiring managers, how they're approaching all of this, like how to incorporate AI into the hiring process, all of those pieces, so that we collectively are getting better at hiring and making the experience suck less for everybody. As we talked about trust earlier, I don't know if I can ever make people trust, but my goal is, it's a really hard, shitty process for everybody, and I would love to make it suck less. So thank you for anybody who's still watching. All right.
All
And
right.
thank you for interviewing.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.